We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
We're live. We did it. We pressed the buttons.
We did it. Yay.
Yay.
We lost the Tommy somewhere. Yay.
Yay.
Everybody.
Run out.
Indie News Network, collaborative family of independent content creators.
It's American tradition. It's indie. It's Jesse. What's up, everyone?
What's up, Space Monkeys? Welcome to Political Flight Club. I'm Robert Durden.
It's good to be here. Finally, I'm on Extra Bulla.
I'm Tatami of the YouTube channel Tatami's Diary.
Welcome to another episode of the show your parents warned you about. It's Reef After Dark.
This is the Tommy Nation Politics.
Hey guys, this is Tommy, Tommy Nation Politics.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Politics is Survival.
Hello, my name is Lucy from Blue Moon Red Wine, and I'm very happy to be a founding member of INN.
Well, hi, everybody. It is, how did we miss that?
We're also available on all your favorite podcast platforms. Again, Spotify.
On Twitter and Instagram.
YouTube, Twitch, Odyssey, Facebook Live,
Discords and Telegram. And
Also on Amazon, Apple, Google Podcasts there also.
again, this is it. We use all these platforms to make sure that no one platform can shut us down. That's the other reason for diversification. They're trying to eliminate us.
It's kind of cool the way that these indie media networks, they operate differently than these other networks in that you're going to get honest opinions, you're going to get honest commentary because we're not sold out, but you're also going to get a lot of like unique personalities.
At Shutdown Amazon is now either co-opted or has explaining to do. In less than 1 month, he showed up to GQ, Teen Vogue, shaking Aunt POTUS's hand.
I still always like to say thank you and shout out the volunteers and the people that actually make this show happen.
I like it better than anything else.
Yeah, we know, Nancy. We know.
Guys, this is Tommy with Tommy Nation Politics. Free thinking, innovative, and open-minded new independent progressive media.
We'll see you next time. This was the Politics of Survival.
You keep questioning everybody's motivations, and thank everybody for coming tonight, and we'll see you next week, and download the podcast. Right, everybody.
Don't vote Democrat.
Keep listening to what little birds have to tell you.
Please wash your ass.
Keep fighting that good fight out there, guys. I'll talk to you later.
Who are these people?
What's up, everybody? We're here with another special episode that we had to pre-record. So technically, we're in the past. You're in the present, I guess. I'm here with my lovely co-host, as always, Collin, Care Bear, Carter, and below me, the jovial Jaybe Font. How are you, friend?
Good to see every single one of you today. I am back on the INN, and I'm happy to be here. And look, I'm with the Care Bear and the Canna Bear. Hey, it's all good.
Yeah. It almost froze here in Tallahassee. I know you're a little lower than me, but it was close. It was pretty chilly the other day. Don't know how Orlando fared, but
Yeah, it was in the 60s. It wasn't too bad.
no. Well,
I'm sure. I forgot what the temperature was. It's currently 60 right now.
yeah.
So,
Well, we brought stories for you.
57.
You know, we normally like let people just do whatever they want, but we figured we'd make you like learn some stuff.
Don't let me do what I want. Come on, Reef.
I know, right? But Collin, you brought a couple.
I brought a couple.
Yep.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yeah, well enough, I think.
I am in New Jersey with my mom visiting, so I don't have my full equipment. So this is going to be me struggling tonight. So if you see me like frantic, that's why. But Jaybe, I have a very special person that I would like you to meet, who will be a part of our first segment. Meet Dr. Afrikana Chihombori. Not sure if you heard of her. She was the former representative to the 8 African Union. And she gave a speech back in 2019, which some people say essentially got her fired. So from that position. So you'll see why. But I think from that, there's some things that I think you and I and Reef can definitely talk about in terms of what she said. She talks a lot about Africa. She's from Zimbabwe originally, but studied in the States, has a huge heart for Africa and the diaspora. But she mentioned something I think also relate to, I think, kind of what we kind of talk about on the left. So I definitely want to share that. And then, Dr. Kwame Ture. So we've been talking about him extensively this year, and I think given that we're ending this year and entering a new one, I think this would be kind of a perfect time to kind of see, I think, more succinctly what his values and his ideology is. Because I think this is kind of things that we need to start talking about moving forward in terms of the crappy 2 years that we've had, I think, especially given politics on the left. So I think he'll be a good spot in terms of thinking about like what we need to do to regroup and then regroup and then, moving forward and then thinking about seriously what strategies that we need to really fulfill, I think, on the left, moving forward. So, and then what you got?
I got, kind of goes along with your first story. Zimbabwe bans the export of lithium. So that'll be interesting to see how that fares. There's a few little like fine print in there, so we'll get to that. And then I brought a article by Danny Haifong about capitalism and how it's pretty much racism plus classism, standard stuff. So anyway, you want to get started? I'm Dan.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, we gotta help with this. So
cool, I got you, fam.
Thank you. So Dr. Afrikana gave a speech. I think the speech she gave in 2019, and I think she spoke here at a conference. But she talked about the Berlin conference, so we're going to get a little history here. But I think we're going to split it up in two parts, and then we're going to discuss it. So I think we should just get right into it, and then we'll talk about it.
Cool.
Welcome to the African Leadership Series, where we bring you great inspirational speeches from African leaders.
Good evening, African Diaspora. The more I begin to understand not only our Africa, but the more I begin to understand us as Black people, why is it that we are the most disrespected people on earth, no matter where you find us on this globe? They often wondered why these Black people are so smart and so indestructible. Maybe it's because of that third eye. No, it is the melanin. That's what makes us special. That's what makes us the origin of humanity, which is our motherland. Our motherland, Africa. The continent with everything and anything the world needs. The continent that everybody is going to for their needs. But the continent that we, the children of Africa, are busy running away from. That keeps me up every night. The more I try to dig deeper in understanding as to why Africa is where Africa is today, I couldn't help but find myself repeatedly going back to the beginning to say, how did we end up where we are as Africans? How did we get here? Not only as Black people, but as Africans. The colonizers started coming to Africa, starting with the Portuguese, followed with slavery. But by 1884, after they had been haphazardly going into our continent, looting from the Africans, pretty soon they started looting from each other the loot that they had looted from the Africans. And before you know it, they were killing each other. And they were getting ready to have a war, a European war on the African soil. So Bismarck Chancellor of Germany at that time, called his sidekick Leopold, King Leopold of Belgium, said, listen, we got a problem. We're getting ready to kill each other and have a European war in Africa. Why don't we call all the colonizers? That was France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Belgium, and of course the mighty Britain. Let's all meet in Berlin, Germany, and strategize on how we can organize ourselves so we can effectively see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated. They proceeded to chop up our Africa into tiny little countries that we know of today. Economies that are designed to see to it that they will never make it on their own. And in the event those small economies do make it, they're easy to destabilize. Who, in their right mind, puts a country together like Gambia, Burundi, Togo, Djibouti, Lesotho, Swaziland, and many, if not all, African countries. Each one of them was given the same sovereignty as China, as India. If this world was to be a boxing game, you see, in boxing, they understand that heavyweights belong in the heavyweight boxing ring, middleweights in the middleweights, lightweights and wannabes in their rings. Wannabes are way out there. You don't take a wannabe boxer and throw them in the same ring with the heavyweight. But what's being done to our Africa? Let's start negotiating. It's country against country. Countries, please stand up. Little Gambia stands up. And Gambia is supposed to negotiate with China. Lesotho is supposed to negotiate with India. Swaziland must jump in with the United States. Djibouti, you must go in. You see, the Europeans realized as individual European countries, they can make it. So they came together as the European Union. So they negotiate as a bloc. So yeah, Djibouti, you go in with EU. And when the African countries lose, the world stands back and says, what's wrong with you, African countries? Why aren't you able to manage your people? How can that be? Where is the parity? African countries are wannabe boxers who are constantly being thrown into the heavyweight boxing ring, and we're getting our rear ends kicked day in and day out.
Thoughts?
I'm curious to see why Jaybe has you nodding your head quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, it's quite interesting, especially the boxing analogy, when really the European nations decided to carve up Africa in the image that they wanted it to be. Whereas if you look at Africa as a whole, it's an extremely rich continent. In fact, it's so rich that it really could outflank the rest of the world as far as resources is concerned. I remember when Parenti actually said that there's no such thing as a poor country. Countries are not poor. He said they are rich. It's just they are overly exploited. So you can take this for the entire whole of Africa, and that they are constantly being extracted from and exploited because of imperialism that's being done by these Western European and the United States, these countries. So as far as what she was saying, I really didn't see much to disagree with at all. I saw really no lies. So
there was something that she mentioned at the very beginning that I thought was interesting given my experience living in Africa briefly and returning for visits since in East Africa.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned how Africa is a continent that everyone wants to go to, but Africans themselves are trying to get away. And in speaking with the youth, like when I was living there, and then this since, I've had not, and this is, and take this with a grain of salt, people who are watching, but these examples are anecdotal, but I think it'd be maybe worth doing a deep dive on this more, because I think there's definitely a bigger correlation to what I'm saying here. There was a lot of youth who basically asked me, what do I have to do in order to work in the States or in the UK?
Mm.
They see the West as the way for them to make it, because the infrastructure in many of these countries are not necessarily there for them.
Mm-hmm.
I know plenty of people now who I have a friend who's working in Florida, actually, on a cruise boat from Uganda. I know another person who, at least, not right now, at least at one point, he was working in Dubai. I have another friend.
To stick with the boxing analogy, Francis Ngannou, heavyweight champion of the world right now, went from Cameroon to Morocco to France, like by way of a rubber dinghy and a paddle and like 80, friends of his, like in the dark. Had to go through the Namibian desert a few times before he got there. Like that's standard stuff from what Collin tells me. So
yeah. So for me, it's kind of like, that's why I think, especially, with people saying, I think in particular with China, because I know there's like a pro-China sentiment in terms of Africa, and I tell people it's a mixed bag. There's a lot more nuance to that, and I'm not one to speak on that necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But even with China too, they're coming in, and yeah, they're doing a lot of great things. You can argue for the countries that they're working for, and there's still this idea for African people, not all, but many, who feel like I have to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So if China is coming in and helping, why is that sentiment still there? And I don't think I've ever seen anyone talk about it from that context. So I think it is definitely something worthwhile that we need to discuss. And I think bring in that nuance as far as China, but I know definitely from the West, like what they have done, just given their history. So it makes sense. But the idea of, relating to a boxing match, how African countries wannabe boxers are basically trying to defend themselves among heavyweights, I think it's very much spot on. And I can also make that connection to, she's talking about Africans specifically. You can also see it, as far as Black people in the diaspora, like what we have to go against as far as here, in terms of issues that are specific to us that we're trying to go up against, people who are, well, as she said, well organized, elite, as I know you guys say in RBN a lot, they're organized by, they have that solidarity among each other, by class.
Yeah.
So, so it's easy for them to unite to push down the working class. And very often among the working class, we don't ever see that kind of solidarity among us usually. Well, we're divided on purpose.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Well, one of the things that I think is also important to note is that, and you hear Nick say this all the time, the United States is the most propagandized country in the world. That propaganda also extends internationally. Right. So therefore, a lot of people, particularly a lot of young people within these African countries, are also propagandized to think that the West is better than what it actually is. Right. And so then they think, oh man, the West is popping. I got to get over there so I can actually make it. When in reality, it's only popping for the people who are rich.
Right.
And so I think that
it's popping for, people with the means to be able to go, especially from the West or from the East, like looking at the Middle East and China. And as she said, they're coming in and picking up these opportunities. And that really should be us. That really should be Black people in the diaspora in and taking in charge of those opportunities. Like,
which she gets into a little more here, if you want to finish up this little video here.
Yeah. Volume.
Has changed. The strategy that was put in place to see to it that Africa and her children are forever defeated and dominated remains alive and well. And yet in our minds we tend to think Berlin Conference is a thing of the past. Well, my brothers and sisters, Berlin Conference is alive and well. And allow me to take it home for you. Have you ever wondered why intra-Africa trade is sitting at 18%? I'll tell you why. We have 43 different currencies on the continent. It's difficult to trade with each other because of the currencies. It's easier for us to exchange with the US dollar with the euro than with each other. Why is that, Berlin Conference? It's easier for Mozambique to send Mozambican oil outside Mozambique to Europe and everywhere else, just so Zimbabwe next door can buy it from across the oceans. It's easier for a company that's manufacturing the best ceramic tiles in Africa, in Egypt. That company sends its tiles to Italy, only for the Africans to turn around and buy the same tiles, 20, 30 times the cost. Why is it that we are not trading with each other? It's because, starting in South Africa, there's a road that goes up until maybe 2-3 kilometers from the border with Botswana. And that same road picks up 2-3 kilometers into Botswana. And if only we could connect the two. But Berlin Conference said, no, you're different. You're another country. You can't look at it this way. If we were to connect all the existing power lines in Africa today, we would provide electricity to 30 million more people. And in the process, we would save $20 billion. But the reason we can't connect the power lines, thanks to Berlin Conference. We're different countries. We can cross that border. Why are our children crossing the Mediterranean in search of nothing? It's because little Gambia can only create so many jobs. And a young man in Gambia, which is surrounded by Senegal, cannot go to Senegal and look for a job. Thanks to the Berlin Conference. Question then becomes, if you look at all the issues we're dealing with today in Africa, one by one, every one of them relates back to the Berlin Conference and our inability to work together as one continent, one Africa, speaking with one voice. Thanks to Berlin Conference.
If you like informative and educative videos about Africa, make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And might I remind the audience, who was it that was trying to create an actual African currency in order to unite Africa economically? It was the head of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, that was actually trying to do that until he was basically murdered by the United States years ago.
Crazy how that works.
It's crazy how it works. And so he actually wanted to create a United States of Africa. And the United States and the West actually saw that as a huge, major threat. Can you imagine with the amount of resources that the continent of Africa has? And if they were able to utilize it, not only just their resources as in materials, but also as in people, and basically smash all those borders and in a sense become its own country, and then start actually contending with the West. Can you imagine what that would do to Western hegemony? Yeah. That would send them running to the hills. And so they know this, and this is why they have this division, because if you divide it, then guess what? This means that you keep Africa poor, so that even though they're rich, they really can't do much as far as the influence that's being exerted upon them.
It's that third world classism that we set up after the Cold War and before then.
Yeah.
So
in the West, I think especially among Black people here, the propaganda that we look at in Africa is that they're poor. And it's like, oh, and you might be poor over here, but you're like, we got better than we do over it, than they do over there. So we're good.
Yeah.
When it's the rich who are more in the know are like, oh, we can go to Africa and make good, who are going over and making something of themselves over there. And we're not. And I think for me, like the biggest frustration I've had going over there for me as a Western Black person, I'm kind of considered a novelty. Like it's more expected for an African, especially in the bush, to see someone who's white. So someone like Reef, than someone like you and I, Jaybe. Like,
yeah.
Like I've literally been told that, like in person, like an African told me, yeah, like we don't make that connection that there are Black people who are living outside, because the people who are coming out from outside don't look like us, or don't look like them, rather. Like they're very obviously, not, from the continent, so to speak. So it's that idea of that division, more so in terms, not just the division within Africa, but the division outside in the diaspora as well. Like last week we talked about reparations. CARICOM has a list of demands already. I'm sure you are aware of that, but do African Americans know about that? So it's the idea of like, if we were better united, and of course, like this is on purpose. the idea is that the more divided we are, the less that we know about each other, and especially the things that we're doing that collectively we can't do much, if of anything. So I feel like the Berlin Conference isn't just necessarily affected of Africa, like primarily, by extension, it's affected us in the West as well. And as you said, Jaybe, like the struggle is international. And I think this, and I keep saying this is what makes what Obama did in terms of shutting down the NBA players when they were willing to strike in like George Floyd, all the more heinous. Because that could have been an opportunity internationally to talk about social justice on an international scale, because the NBA is watched all over the world. Yes. The idea it got that, the fact that George Floyd got all that attention anyway, could have been a marker in terms of the Black consciousness being able to have these discussions finally, and Obama stopped it.
Yeah. JB, anything to finish up with?
It's quite sad that a son of Kenya was one of the ones who shut that down. Yeah. It's pretty sad. It's depressingly ironic that someone like him would do such a thing.
Yep. I feel you. Well, luckily, there's a few African countries that I feel like might have some solutions to that Western hegemony. And it's mainly don't interact with them, is what it sounds like. So I don't know if you heard about this, JP, but Zimbabwe bans lithium exports. They want batteries made in their own country where the lithium is.
So are we going to be seeing Elon Musk crying anytime soon? Because billionaire tears are delicious, I heard. They're a delicacy.
Most likely. So this is from News Desk. So Zimbabwe says develop batteries for electric vehicles here as it bans the export of raw lithium. Right?
Ooh. So
Zimbabwe earlier this week stopped the export of raw lithium from its mines and said that it wants cash in on the value addition, and also stopped losing billions to foreign companies via mineral proceeds, news agencies reported. On December 20th, Zimbabwe's Ministry of Mines and Mining Development, in a directive published under the nation's Base Mineral Exports Control Act, said that the move was made to ensure that the visions of the president to see the country becoming an upper middle class income economy has been realized. Winston Chintando, following the export ban, said no lithium-bearing ores or unbeneficiated lithium whatsoever shall be exported from Zimbabwe to another country except under the written permission of the minister. The directive excludes mining companies which build processing plants. Deputy Mining Minister Polite Kambamora said he told courts that if Zimbabwe continues to export raw lithium, then it shall go nowhere. Thoughts?
This is interesting. I expect there to be a coup in Zimbabwe by the CIA in, say, about 6 months.
6 months, you say, huh?
Yeah, Reef, Collin, what say you? I mean, 6 months. 6 months. Yeah, next thing you know,
what are we doing?
Some civil war in Zimbabwe.
Price is Right rules. I'll vote $1.
Like Afrikana 6 exists.
Yes. Yep.
So, and we talked about maybe about a month ago now. We don't know for sure how many bases they have on the continent.
So, interestingly enough, there are
40, but more.
Yeah, we only know of like 40 of them, right? And like when people started asking questions, they go, I don't know. We got bases near some folks. I don't know. So According to Reuters, Chinese mining giant and lithium-ion battery material manufacturers Zhejiang Huayu Cobalt, Cinnamine Research Group, and Xinjiang Lithium Group acquired several lithium mines and have bagged projects worth a combined $678 million in Zimbabwe and are at various stages of developing mines and processing plants. These companies are exempted from the bans, which is an interesting part of that. So China is going to be fine. They're going to be all right here.
Yeah.
So we want to see lithium batteries being developed in the country. We have done this in good faith for the growth of the industry. Kambambura was quoted as saying by courts, the Zimbabwean government claims that it lost $1.8 billion in mineral revenues due to smuggling and externalization to South Africa and the UAE. Gold and lithium are among the most smuggled minerals, with gold being the most smuggled. Zimbabwe is on track to become one of the world's largest lithium exporters, and the government expects that it will meet 20% of the world's total demand for lithium when it fully exploits all known lithium resources. At least 60% of Zimbabwe's exports are mostly minerals, and the mining sector makes up to 60% of its GDP, the London School of Economic data from 2021, accessed by news outlet Quartz shows. Zimbabwe is currently facing tons of debt. President Emerson Mnangagwa said the ban targets hordes of artisanal miners who, after being attracted to the high demand of lithium, started capturing abandoned mines to dig for lithium-bearing rocks. Lithium is the new gold as the world shifts to clean energy, right? Especially in electric vehicles. Lithium-ion batteries will dominate the industry. The demand for lithium has increased, and compared to 2021, its price has soared more than 180%. African nation lost $12 billion through illegal trade involving multinational companies from richer nations. These funds were more than enough to clear Harar's foreign debt of $13.7 billion. Western companies have been involved in corruption and have exploited Africa's lithium mines. In the Arcadia lithium mine, located 308 kilometers south of the capital Harar, is developed, then the annual production will reach 2.5 million tons, bringing in $3 billion in exports. So, interesting little move by Zimbabwe. Interesting that they're excluding China from this as well. That might help not be cooed, I would think.
Right, but again, as I say, you know, and again, I don't want to.
Yes.
Look, I think just me, because I'm just kind of not a very trusting person anyway. But like, again, just this whole thing with China, I think we have to look at it a little deeper, and we have to look at it from, because the people who are talking about, like, you know, this pro-China sentiment are, you know, are people on the left who don't necessarily know the whole details, or just hearing it, you know, within, you know, certain circles, you know, or other people, you know, that might be reporting on it. And having been on the ground in Africa, that Africans may not necessarily share that sentiment in terms of the Chinese being in their countries.
Okay.
So I'm just saying that because, and again, I'm not the authority on this. I'm not the expert on this. The things that I'm saying are mostly anecdotal. But I do feel like we also have to kind of look at what Africans are saying and take their stories and taking their perspective into consideration, which we almost never do, and which is hard to get, you know. So, but I think especially on, you know, we kind of call this out, you know, mainstream media, that often or not, they just have a bias of talking about one side and not multiple. We have to do the same thing on the left in terms of, you know, relations with China and Africa, because I kind of make the association as far as student loan debt. Like, if you take on that as a college student, and then if you have a job that you're able to pay it off within a short amount of time, then taking the loans was a good move for you, you know? So you can make that association with certain African countries, especially with the infrastructure that China is helping them build, if they have the means, if they're able to benefit from that, you know, make a profit out of that within their country, then great, you know, fine. But that's not always happening in certain countries, the infrastructure projects that China is initiating.
Yeah. Well, that's how they got grandfathered into this deal, essentially, was that they were doing stuff. So,
right.
JB, anything to add?
Yeah, that's also a really important point. You cannot. The continent and the land belongs to them, so they should have a say over what goes in and goes out. My question, though, would be, are the profits from the lithium sales that Zimbabwe oversees, are the entire population of Zimbabwe going to be seeing the profits? Or is it going to just a small number of people? Because if that means that they're sharing the profits with all the population, then that sounds a lot like what people like Gaddafi was doing with the oil, what Mohammed, I think it was Mohammed Mossadegh was doing with Iran, if I'm correct. And so it sounds like what Evo Morales wanted to do with Bolivia regarding their lithium. And so the United States will see that in companies who are utilize the lithium within their batteries would look at that and say, oh no, we're going to be in trouble because we won't be able to get this lithium for cheap like we used to, or for damn near free. So my question is, if they're doing it that way while distributing it among all the people, or that's what the people say they want, then my fear is that the United States or any other type of Western entity is going to try to come in and undermine and destabilize Zimbabwe in order to get their hands on the lithium, because it's just like the article said, lithium is the new gold. And really, I would go farther and say lithium might be the new oil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because gold is really just a luxury. It's not used in too many things industrially versus oil.
That's about it.
Yeah. Yeah. But oil, for the most part, is more universally used as a resource. And so if we're replacing oil powered products with electric powered products, then that lithium is going to have a value that's going to be commensurate with oil.
Between that and water, we're going to have a tough time fighting over them. So, I mean, this is the global north versus the global south, and pretty much every resource, I mean, pick one, it's happening. So, but anyway, Collin, you brought one of your favorite people and you forced him to be one of my favorite people. So we might as well get into him. Kwame Ture.
Yeah. So,
my birthday twin.
I know, huh?
Your birthday twin. But yeah. But you wanted me to talk about him tonight, though.
Yes, I did.
So, but yeah, we've done somewhat of a deep dive with Ture over the past few months. A little bit, probably too much for our audience, so they know him very well. But I think in terms of like what I was saying earlier, JB, you know, we've had, well, you can argue the left, we've had a very rough, you know, going just generally, but I think within the last couple of years, I think especially have been especially rough. I think given, you know, we're seeing the true colors of certain people in power and even in our space who've kind of revealed, you know, where their priorities are and have shifted into directions that are not necessarily reminiscent of if you're on the left, what you should be. And so, and one thing that I kind of mentioned, I think a couple of streams back, is the fact that I think we're at a point on the left where we have to kind of regroup, rethink in terms of like what we need to do, like what do we best need to do moving forward, and then proceed from there. And so, so we talked about this in light of what Kwame Ture has said in the past in terms of his thoughts on capitalism and then mobilization and organization. And then there's actually a part in regards to homosexuality that I think in terms of all of this that, you know, you're being, like, we wanted to talk to you about it. And I asked you beforehand if you were willing to talk about it, and you said yes. So, so these are, for people who are watching, these are new to you. But we're just going to go a little overview of what Kwame has said in terms of capitalism and then organization, mobilization, and then we're going to go into, I think, a little more specific from there. So, Reef, if you won't mind, please.
Yes, sir.
We must understand clearly when we talk about capitalism, who are the capitalists? As if we understand that there are only a few people who own and control the means of production in the society, then we begin to understand that there are a few capitalists. And these capitalists exploit everybody because everybody works for them.
Just FYI, 1973. Okay.
Everybody sells their labor to them. It is by selling your labor to a capitalist that he's really able to exploit you. Instead of going through theories, let me give some direct example. Let's say that I'm a capitalist. And let's say that I sell shirts. I sell shirts. I have a shirt factory. Let's say this is my factory. I own it. The machinery. I have a place where I get cotton. Now I own it. I'm the capitalist. And let's say you are my workers. You are my workers. You don't know me. You never see me. You see my lackeys, you know, maybe my foreman, but you never see me. Now, let's say it costs me 50 cents for cotton for every shirt I make. And let's say it costs me 50 cents for upkeep of my machinery. That's $1. And let's suppose I pay you $1 for every shirt you make. That means it costs me $2 to get a shirt. Labor included, your labor. I pay you for making the shirt. Now, when I sell the shirt, being a capitalist, and you must know something about capitalism, very important. The sole motivating force in a capitalist society is profit. Profit. That is the sole motivating force. Profit. Get money. Get it. Get it as fast as you can. Get it any way you can, but get it. Just get it. Just get it. And even in, in the African community, it affects us here in this country because Africans, those of us living in America, those of us born in America, we are imbued with the philosophy of capitalism, and sometimes we don't even recognize it. Thus, you find brothers and sisters even selling dope to their brothers and sisters to make money. Again, because we're imbued with the philosophy of get some money. Ain't nothing wrong to kill for money. Hell, your country is napalming for money. You can certainly kill for some money. All right, just get it. Just get it. It's the overall philosophy. When we talk about revolution, we must talk about changing values. We must talk about changing values, and we must understand these values. To the shirt factory. I've not forgotten. I'm just going to tie it in. I'll tie it in for you. I'll tie it in. You will see, you must look under the shirt factory, too. You must look for spiraling economy. That's very important, spiraling economy. I sell the shirt for $5. I sell the shirt for $5. I don't do anything. You're the one who make the shirt. I'm exploiting your labor. You toil, you sweat, I get the fruit. That's right, I get it. But you grow it, you plant it by the sweat of your brow. I get it. I sell the shirt for $5. I am exploiting your labor. I really am exploiting your labor. I mean, even when you want a shirt, hey, you got to come to my store and buy the shirt for $5. Yeah, I really am exploiting you. Now, you're workers, you're in a factory, so you begin to get social consciousness. Yes, you do. Marx talks about this. Because you're working together, you see the socialized process, the laboring process, and you're able to see clearly how you're being exploited. So you get together, and you start talking about, we want more money. You tell my foreman we want more money. So the foreman comes to see me. He says, the workers say they want more money. Later for them. Keep them working, man. So he comes back, no raise. So y'all work, but y'all get a little bit more agitated, you know, because it's scientific. The pressure rises, and as the pressure rises, the consciousness must rise. It's scientific. It can't be stopped. That's why revolution can't be stopped. Then you say, hey, look here, we're going to strike. So the foreman comes back and said, hey, they say they're going to strike. I say, oh, let them strike, man. And sure enough, y'all strike. Yeah, y'all strike on me. Now, when you strike, of course, my machinery stops. I ain't making no money. So after a while, I called my foreman. I said, what do they want? He says, well, they said they want $1.50 more a shirt. They want 50 cents more a shirt. So I said, okay, let them have it. So I'll bring you back. You happy? I pay you $1.50 more. Right, so it now costs me $2.50 to make a shirt. It cost me $2.50 to make a shirt. Before, it cost me $2. I was selling it for $5. But hey, look here. I can't go out there and keep selling it for $5. Hey, how am I do that? I'm going to lose profit. And look here. Since the sole motivating force in a capitalist system is profit, ain't no need for me to come and sell it for $5.50. Hey, no. Next time you see that shirt on the market, it's going to cost you $7.50. Right, right. And that's what's known as the spiraling economy, because profit is what about? Wages go up into demands of the workers, and prices rocket. Wages go up, prices rockets, and it keeps going and going and going until it's got to blow the top. It's scientifically real. That's why Nixon is talking about freezing wages and freezing prices. He's stupid. You got to freeze capitalism, Nixon. Freeze capitalism. That's the problem. That's the problem. Yes, that's the problem. You must understand these concepts, because once you begin to understand them and master them, you will see the inevitability of revolution. Not only the inevitability of revolution, but you will see the inevitability of victory for the struggling masses around the world once you understand the scientific principles of revolution. Once you understand it.
Good stuff from 1973. How much a shirt cost now? How much we spiraled?
Who's making it? Is on it, but this is how why unions need to go.
Yep.
And I'll tell you why. Because this is the back and forth that Ture talks about. You know, you get a little bit more, you might get a little bit more as far as wages, but then the elites increase the price, or they increase your workload, and you go back, and like, so there's this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth against capitalism, and no one is talking about that.
Yeah.
So, you know, that system has to be destroyed.
Maybe this sounds a lot like what you talk about on your show frequently. I don't know about you, but
yeah,
sounds very familiar. But we got another one. Ready for another bit of Ture? Chapter 9, verse 2? Okay. Sound. God, that would help.
It will be solved. There's a difference between revolution and reform. It's a big difference. True. In reform, a man observing a foundation, observing a system, sees many problems. But he assumes that there's nothing wrong with the system. The foundation of the system for him is a good system. Thus, what he seeks to do is to change the building as best he can, but he wants to leave the foundation intact. Example, if I came to this building, it's Ackerman Hall, is it not? If I came to Ackerman Hall and I looked at the foundation was falling. It was just falling, couldn't possibly stand. If I were a reformist, I'd say, okay, put a piece of board over that. So we cover the foundation. We haven't touched it, and then I'll come here and say, put a window there, put a door here, put a frame here, put 2 rooms where there used to be 1. What I'm doing is reforming the system. I am trying to make it look different, but I'm keeping the same rotten foundation. You must understand that, because this country is full of reformists. black people notwithstanding. And these reformists have a tendency to deceive you, to let you believe that things are really being changed, when in fact the foundation has not been touched, and the longer it stays, the more rotten it becomes. The more rotten it becomes. A revolutionary comes into the building, observes Ackerman Hall, and says, looks at the foundation and said, hey, this foundation is filthy, it's rotten, it's corrupt, it must be torn up. A new one must be put in its place. Once he makes that decision, and once that theoretical decision which he's made is demonstrated actively in his day-to-day life, you have a revolutionary. Thus, a revolutionary is not someone who seeks to reform a system, he's someone who seeks to replace it. I'm a revolutionary. I'm not a reformist. I want the American system destroyed. It must be destroyed and has to be replaced. Has to be replaced. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Again, I'm not calling for revolution. I see it coming, and I want to be part of the solution. I don't want to be part of the problem. I've been the victim too long, so I want to be part of the solution. I am saying that all of us must opt for revolution. All of us must opt for revolution. Now, revolution is very scientific. There's nothing emotional about it. There's nothing emotional about it. President Sekou Ture, a wise and courageous African revolutionary, says that in revolution there is no sentimentality. There is none. Whether I like something or do not like something, it is scientifically determined for me, thus I must do it. So I have no sentiments involved in my work. I just have to do what I have to do, and I will do it the best way I can. Best way I can. Now, revolution, we said, follows scientific laws. If you come and you look at the foundation and you see the foundation is rotten, and you say that you want to replace this foundation, you want a new system, you're asking for revolution. Because what you're saying is that you want another system where there is a system. And we know scientifically that no two things can occupy the same place at the same time. I mean, that's logic. So if you say that you're against capitalism and you want another system put in the place of capitalism, then all you're saying is that you want revolution, because capitalism and this other thing cannot occupy America at the same time. Only one will occupy it. Only one will be dominant. Thus, if you say you want revolution, you understand you're talking about scientific principles. Two systems cannot occupy the same space at the same time. I'm opposed to capitalism. I seek an economic system which must follow the principles of scientific socialism. This system must come, will come, all over the world, America notwithstanding. It must come and will come.
Dude's on point. 1973, on point. Like, can't argue with anything. So,
yeah. But I think for me, I think this is what frustrates me, is that people often talk around, as he's described, we talk around the problem and not get to the heart of the problem or the root of the problem and attack it from there. Like, we just do the dance around it. And I think there are people on purpose whose job is to kind of talk around the issues and give it the window dressing of, so it goes in the sense of talking about incrementalism.
Yeah.
Why do bit by bit when we can attack it right from the heart and get it out of the way right then and there? Or at least attack it, at least address it, and kind of go into it from there.
But Collin, we have to respect our politicians. We have to respect them. Like, I mean, I know Jaybe at the Reformist Blackout Network, I'm sorry, the Revolutionary Blackout Network, has had a few words with people who just want to reform.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. And how many times have people told you to just reform? It'll be okay. Like,
what do you mean? We gonna be all right?
Right.
We gonna be all right.
Yeah, we gonna be all right. That's right. We gonna be all right.
Be all right. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's one of them. That's one of them.
Yeah.
But it's not the goal to say like for student loan cancellation, that's 10 and 20K. You know, we should be happy with that.
No, we shouldn't.
I know plenty of people who are way more debt than that. I know a teacher who's in 6 figures of debt.
Mm.
You know, that's a drop in the bucket for her.
Yeah.
Now, the question now is that ever going to happen now, given that it's blocked? But, you know, it's the idea of like, let's be honest with people, and talk about what the main issues are. Talk about things at the base of the problem. And then if you want to go with the incremental from there, that's one thing. I can, you know, especially given that, but there has to be like a plan. There has to be a strategy as to how, like, the prize is won, basically.
Yeah.
Like, it's like a doctor going in and seeing, okay, I know what the root of the problem is, but we can't attack it at once. We have to do this first, and then we have to do this first, and then we have to do this. So
awareness isn't the issue anymore. I think people are aware there's problems. You know, we don't need to mobilize over awareness. You know,
right.
Like you have to organize over things you're for, things that you're can actually see achieved. You know,
I think one thing that Dr. Arikana said, well, she applied it, and I didn't say any other segment, is that I think our biggest issue is that she mentioned boxing, heavyweights.
Mm.
Heavyweights aren't the politicians. And I think we make that mistake all the time.
The capitalists.
It's the corporations, it's the big banks.
Follow the money.
That are kind of,
Follow the money,
and we don't
Lebowski.
talk, and we give, really, the politicians are really the middle weight.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Of course.
So I think in terms of strategy,
they hold
sometimes,
water for the capitalists. That's what they do.
Right. We don't go at the right enemy
Mm-hmm.
often. We don't often talk about, like, no, it's Bank of America, it's Chase, it's BlackRock, it's AT&T.
Yeah.
It's all these big corporations that are running the show.
Yeah.
We don't often talk about it in that context. We always kind of bring it down to, oh, it's Biden's fault. Oh, it's AOC's fault, which it is in part. But as you said, they're the puppets, essentially, to the big bosses that we have to deal with.
Ture has some solutions if you want to hear them.
If I may.
Yes, you may.
One of the things that and Kwame Ture was alluding to this basically, and I spoke about this earlier on my show earlier today, was that reformists, they want to treat the symptom, not the underlying cause of the problem. So when you look at the symptoms of capitalism, you have to look at it like it's a viral infection. And you have that viral infection, some of the symptoms may be watery eyes, it could be a congested nose, it could be clogged ears, it could be a strep throat, it could be like a scratchy throat, a sore throat. Am I going to completely alleviate the systemic issue if I give you some chloroseptic spray? Am I going to alleviate the system if I give you a box of Kleenex? Am I going to alleviate the system by giving you some Vicks Vapor Rub to put on your chest and your back? Is that really going to truly alleviate it? Well, no, it's not. I need to give you an antiviral in order to completely get rid of the problem, underlying cause. The problem is you have so many people that try to treat the system with the chloroseptic spray, with the blocks of Kleenex, and they try to treat it with some Vicks Vapor Rub. But the thing is like we're sitting here going, no, you need the antiviral in order to attack it at its root. But then some will go, but that's too extreme. I'm sorry if you hate needles, but guess what? That is what's going to happen. The needle is the revolution. And in order for that to happen, you need to inject that needle. It's going to be painful at first, but you need to accept that in order to get the real help that you need in order to change the system. Because if you don't, then guess what's going to happen? You're going to die. The system is going to kill us. And I say this before, and I'll say it again, capitalism is a system that requires infinite growth on a planet with finite resources. You know what else consists of infinite growth with finite resources? Cancer. Cancer consumes its host until there's nothing left. And so this is one of the reasons why I agree fully with Kwame Ture in saying that if in order for us to truly change the system, a revolution is absolutely necessary. It's not the if, it's the when. That's the issue.
Right.
So that's all I got to say.
Yeah. And as you said, Jaybe, that's what it shouldn't, there shouldn't be any emotion that comes from it. Like,
there's no sentimentality.
Yeah. Right. There's going to be pain.
It's like children in a zombie movie. You just got to get rid of them, you know? But anyway, so I brought this one too. We talk about Kwame and the difference between mobilization and organization. Ture has quite a bit to say about that, so figured I'll let him speak.
Stop. We have told you it's a fact. If you look at history, I have known no great man or no great woman that didn't belong to an organization, not one. The American capitalist system will so confuse some of us that we will actually think that we by ourselves can lead the people to their freedom. There's no such thing as Rambo or Superman. It exists only in Hollywood. Fidel Castro, as bad as he is, he needs the Communist Party of Cuba to help direct Cuba. V.I. Lenin, as rough as he is, he needed a Bolshevik party. Karl Marx was a great man, had to organize the International Workingmen's Association. The Honorable Marcus Garvey saw clear and long, but he needed the Universal Negro Improvement Association of the African Community Leagues. Patrice Lumumba was a great man, he needed organization. Harriet Tubman was a rough sister, she needed organization. Rosa Parks sat down so we can get up. She needed organization. Malcolm X so loved organization that when he left the Nation of Islam, he created two organizations, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated for Muslims and the African American Organization, spotted after the Organization of African Unity. Everywhere you will see the need for organization. Martin Luther King was a righteous man, but even he recognized the need for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And while Nelson Mandela is known all over the world, he still has the African National Congress. Every brother or sister who truly seeks to advance the world must belong to an organization. This we will not stop telling you.
I mean, he goes on to talk about the difference between mobilization, between like what Malcolm did versus what King was. You know, King mobilized, but he didn't necessarily organize. You know, so
this is why Shama's so wide. Not to say I agree with her on everything, but she mostly gets it. And I think in terms of how she talks about socialist alternatives, it's almost like bored with her. It's like you can't talk about her without talking about socialist alternatives. Always. Look at any interview she does. She will always bring up socialist alternatives. When was the last time the Squad has ever mentioned Justice Democrats? It's anything that
Justice who?
Right. When was the last time the Squad has ever mentioned about DSA?
Mm-hmm.
They're affiliated with the depending on who that squad member is. And you never, ever hear them talk about them in terms of the principles that they're trying to bring into Congress. So, you know, but that's important because people have to know who you're aligned with in the sense of figuring out like what you stand for.
True.
And so I think again, just the idea that Kashana Sawan, any interview she does, always talks about socialist alternatives. Always talks about the accountability that she has to have with socialist alternatives. She doesn't do anything without saying, I have to refer to socialist alternative. I have to refer to this group in order to figure out what our best next steps are. Every interview.
Yeah.
So, last thing before we head on to our last story, Jaybe, you yourself are part of the LGBTQ movement, I would say. You know, you enjoy, you know, that men, sort of thing. Yes. That I was gonna go a little more graphic, and then I went, maybe not.
Come on, you know me.
Ture was also part of this organization. Speaking of, if you would call it that, but you want to hear what he has to say on it? Hopefully,
sure.
Otherwise, you're just gonna leave and say, you know, bye, I'm done, I'm out of here. What? Anyway, action.
Down.
Why every time? I swear I turn it back on.
The only way this can be combated is through mass political organization. I think we're about at the conclusion. Fundamentals for unity presupposes organization. Now, we did say one thing, and this is a point we must hammer home. We said that when you think, you must think differently from the enemy. The confusion is here. Many Africans in America actually think, and even some who call themselves revolutionary and Marxist-Leninists say that we Africans in America have the same culture like other people in America. And they say it. This is a great error. This causes a great deal of confusion. Secretary says, à chaque peuple sa culture. Every people have their culture. As a matter of fact, our culture has been in conflict with the American capitalist culture and continues to be and will be until we destroy it. If you're not thinking clearly about your culture, you'll make big errors. I'll give you an example. People have a problem with gay rights and gay and lesbian rights. Man says, you know how come I hear you speak? I never hear you speak about gay and lesbian rights. Yes, that's right. He said, but I go all the others, they speak about it. I said, we are not from the same political platform. I fight for my people's culture. I know they have one. My job is every day to more properly define it and to fight from it. You think we don't have one, so you fight from a capitalist culture. You'll never get anywhere. Africa has a culture of its own. And her people are the carriers of that culture. And anyone who knows anything about culture, when it's attacked, Jack, the people hide it from themselves. Malcolm X said it. He said, they don't call themselves Africans, but you scratch them a little bit, you'll see how African they are. They've hidden Africa from themselves. That is to say, the people seeing the enemy overwhelm them will hide the very culture from the people themselves. The conscious element will come to see how they've hid it, to pick it up. Let me give examples on homosexuality. If you will look at the history of Europe, and you know the first law is always to know the enemy. You will see Europe has a bloody history on the relationship of homosexuality. From Greece all the way down to today, where they're bashing the heads of homosexualities. Africa has none of this. Even Africans in America do not bash in the heads of homosexuals. The question of homosexuality is a question of intolerance. Europe's culture is most intolerant. It's really a culture that has no diversity. It seeks conformity. In the 1960s, if you would go to white colleges, all the white boys on there were wearing crew cuts and sandal shoes. They all look alike. The other day I saw one wearing long hair. He said, what did you do for me anyway? I said, made it possible for you to wear long hair. Yes, crew work up to conformity. It's most intolerant. It's most intolerant. African culture is very tolerant. As a matter of fact, that's why we're the trouble we're in today. I remember as a young tough in Harlem, I used to go to the Audubon Ballroom where Malcolm was assassinated. I used to go to Rockland Palace, and if my memory serves me correctly, it used to happen in April. It still happens. All the homosexuals in the African community, and they put up signs, and I see them now. They have a big transvestite ball. And they would come at Rockland Palace, we were tough, 15, 16 armed. But wouldn't anybody think about hitting any of them? The best we could say is, you really think that one is a woman? Yes. No, none whatsoever. The hardest organization in our community against homosexuality is the Nation of Islam. You hear Minister Farrakhan now saying, you better tell them they got to straighten up their wrists. Yes. But everyone knows James Baldwin. And James Baldwin, no African ever hid their homosexuality. James Baldwin was a homosexual. And yet you would hear Malcolm X and Farrakhan praising James Baldwin for his contribution to the struggle.
Thoughts?
Was that was kind of a hard clip because it's not of good quality. So I thought it'd be better on this.
Yeah, I was stuck a little bit.
But actually, Jaybe, like, I'm curious to hear what you have to say regarding this. I had thoughts because initially, because Reef and I were talking about this last night because I could see what certain people who do not know Ture would kind of take it as, and that's kind of what I was kind of going to argue. You know, maybe that we shouldn't. That's why I asked you first if you were comfortable talking about this.
Please. What?
It's kind of interesting. So from what I gather from what I think I heard, was he was basically saying that we don't need to vocally advocate for it because we already are accepting. That's what it sounds like.
And that there was like other more pertinent issues as far as capitalism was concerned, right?
Yeah. I also have to take into account that Kwame Ture is not living in 2022.
Right. This was back in the 70s. So a different time. So.
Yeah. So when it comes to other rising people, like we have been, this is another part of the struggle that we are demonized against one another in order to further the goals of the capitalists, because the capitalist really is to divide and conquer. So it's the cis person versus the trans person, the heterosexual person versus the LGNB, right? And so because of that, I would deviate a little bit from Kwame Ture at this moment and say it needs to be talked about, but at the same time, it's as a means to educate people, not necessarily to make them feel like it's being forced on them, right?
Right.
It's to enlighten the person to say, the LGBTQ plus people are not your enemy. You need to actually team up with us in order to take down the capitalist, because we share the common enemy together.
Right.
And so I think I would deviate a little bit from his perspective a little bit, because from what I know so far, I think Kwame Ture is coming at it from a heterosexual perspective. He's not coming at it from a James Baldwin's perspective, right?
Right.
Or he's not coming at it from Mayor Ruskin's perspective. So with that being said, it's like, yeah, I get what you're saying. And we should focus on the culture. But the thing is that we are the culture too. We are the culture, you know? So that's, I mean, I don't really have to, like, you know, I think that I kind of hear what he's saying, but at the same time, I deviate a little bit.
Yeah. And I think that's okay, you know, like, and I think this was kind of a similar struggle that I had when I was talking about this with Reef last night, because I feel like people could easily interpret him saying, you know, like the way I took it, like, oh, Africans are, you know, he's saying that Europeans are more tolerant than Africans or vice versa as far as homosexuality. I don't think that's what he's saying here. The way I kind of took it, you know, and knowing, because he did mention, you know, the Greeks and Romans in terms of sexuality, homosexuality. At least for them in those cultures, generally, from what I do know, it wasn't necessarily used in a way of equality in those relationships. It was often used as in terms of power, of usually older men with younger boys that was accepted during that time. But it was also used as for boys to kind of elevate themselves into more in a higher status.
Yeah.
So I think from a more academic standpoint, I think that's what he was looking at homosexuality as in those terms, in the sense of a power dynamic.
Yeah.
So if you look at it in terms of capitalism, that's where I see he's kind of going with. That's in part of the European construct versus now I kind of struggle with this because unfortunately in Africa, you know, homosexuality is not necessarily welcomed on the continent. But you can argue, why is that?
Yeah.
You know, say religion has a lot to do with that. Especially, you know, like the major ones have a lot to impede on that. Awareness, I think, again, somewhat isolated, you know, from the rest of the world, although I think that's slowly starting to change in light of social media and all that, you know, those systems now that are a little more in place. So yeah, that's kind of where I was similar to you, Jaybe. That was kind of like, I do people who didn't necessarily know to write that well, they will kind of attack it from that standpoint. But in looking at what he said previously in the last clips you saw, he's been very consistent in terms of power. Like, who should have the power? Should it be a matter of some or for all? And that's something that he is very consistent on in terms of, you know, his advocacy. It's the idea of like, capitalism is the root of all of our problems in society, you know, in America and in Africa. And we need to get rid of it in order to have there be a more equal plane. And from what I was hearing, because he did highlight James Baldwin, he also recognized, at least from Malcolm X and others,
and Farrakhan,
he helped elevate the movement in terms of the struggle as a queer man.
Yeah.
So for him, I felt like it wasn't necessarily about the culture, like homosexual culture. And again, it's different now because there is a culture now. If you can consider it a culture now, it's more about the solidarity that we need, you know, to kind of link up on, which I think makes sense given what he has said previously. You know, the only way that we can kind of attack capitalism is if we walk in solidarity under certain principles.
Yeah.
in my mind, he would have. I would can imagine saying, "If you're for revolution, come on."
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so it doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah.
And I think that is a message that I think, especially for us, we definitely resonate with.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of find solidarity in people with class.
Yeah.
And you can argue, you know, like, and I'm sure we're going to get into this in the next segment.
Yeah.
There is a correlation between class and race. You can also add, depending who you are, a sexual orientation as well. You could probably add to that too. In that.
Any
so
closing thoughts on that, JB, before we head to the next thing?
Well,
if you got time.
Yeah, because I wanted to tackle the whole thing about, because he said, I remember him saying that Europeans are not as tolerant. That's what I remember hearing him say, that Europeans weren't as tolerant. That being said, you go into the history of Africa and look at colonialism and what it has done to Africa. Of course, the religious part of the colonialism aspect, as well as the cultural aspects of colonialism, has definitely had an influence on Africa into making it seem like anybody that is gay, LGBTQ, is a deviation, when I think there's some scholars and some not archaeologists, but scientists have actually looked back on African history pre-colonial times and saw that they actually were more accepting of people who are LGBTQ within their tribes than they are post-colonial era. And so you can also do the same thing when it comes to indigenous tribes here in the United States and in the whole of America. They were accepting of LGBTQ people as well. So really, it was an influence of Europe and the West that actually caused them to have this certain type of vitriol towards those of us who may be queer. So I think then, sorry, go ahead.
I think it was more like I don't want to say indigenous, but cultures that were not European had a more human approach in terms of sexuality, and then, you know, like in terms of making this, like, you know, just being you. In terms, like, I will argue they didn't necessarily see gender per se in a way. You know, it was just you just are, you know. And then when the Europeans kind of came into these continents, it was the idea of like, oh, you have to wear clothes, or you have to do this. Oh, you're a man, you have to do this. You're a woman, you have to do certain things. You know, like that's kind of where those
European gender roles
was starting. You know, in terms of that's what in like conversation brought with that, and that's before.
Well,
like,
and there's a good point to that, because the gender roles, as you just said, in Reef, was just the European colonists saw that African tribes were some of them were very matriarchal. And so they were like, no, we can't have this. You guys have to have the male as the head, because of their because of the Abrahamic religions that they subscribe to, particularly Christianity. And so they didn't like that. So they tried to teach them, like, no, the man has to be the head, when really in some African tribes, it's like, no, we look up towards, you know, the woman. And the woman also has an equal or greater say than the man in some of these tribes. And the thing is that that's something that people forget. And then you'll have unfortunately, some misinformed Black men that will say, oh, homosexuality is actually colonial. And it's like, no, that's not the case. You know, because the thing is that if you look at how they treat homosexuality, it actually was not, because they looked down upon it way more. So it's not really a colonial thing. So yeah, it was
interesting.
I get what Kwame Ture is saying though, but
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, for the time period, he's doing pretty well. You know.
Yeah.
He's got a little way to go, but
nobody's perfect.
Black. No,
anyway,
I think he was definitely progressive in that regard. As for his time, you would argue that probably a lot of his actual work. So I think that's
so I wanted to get to our last thing. If you still got time, it's like
I got a few minutes.
50, last story is a little bit by Danny. I think you've had him on your show before. I think
I'm trying to get him on my show.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
So, he writes, the ghost stories of capitalism. Racism is real, and it's a class struggle. So this is in conjunction with Black Agenda Report. So from culture wars to identity politics, it's easy to get sucked into toxic rhetoric and forget the reality of racism staring the U.S. in the face. And it begins to quote from Malcolm, you can't have racism without capitalism. So, in today's political climate, the word racism has become taboo. Some on the left take issue with the term because of how it has been co-opted by the neoliberal elite. This is understandable since the neoliberal Democratic Party has indeed exploited race relations in the United States to forward a lesser evil. But no less dangerous brand of U.S. imperialism, racism is thus increasingly viewed as an ideological weapon of liberalism rather than a material force of oppression. So-called conservatives have pounced on the limitations of neoliberal racial politics to strengthen their own brand as crusaders against the woke politics of the Democrats. The problem with all this is that racism is a very real manifestation of class struggle. Racism isn't merely the hateful words and behaviors acted out by individuals. It isn't simply a set of institutional problems that can be reformed away at the workplace or the criminal justice system either. Some on the liberal left say that racism is systemic, but even this is misleading. Failing to name the system, U.S. imperialism, decontextualizes racism from its roots in class power. So, understanding racism as an expression of class power is not merely a thought exercise. U.S. race relations permeate every aspect of material life for working people. Racist ideology has a clear psychological impact, and disparities in policing, incarceration, healthcare, unemployment, and wages have life and death consequences. The purpose of the Ghost Stories of Capitalism series is to strengthen a leftist analysis of political economy and exploitation through the personal experiences of Danny Haiphong. By telling his stories, we strengthen our capacity to move forward, to participate a class struggle for genuine liberation from the imperialist system at the root of oppression. Great start by Danny. Thoughts so far? Anything?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm speaking as a Black person and even as an immigrant, it hits different as a Black person, because you deal with the idea of your skin color, and then usually in the society you're deemed a lower class. Even like if you're like an elite, you still can be considered, and especially for me growing up in those circles, I grew up, especially like high school, college, like I went to elite schools, but I was not necessarily as accepted, quote unquote, in those circles, as, among my peers because I was Black, so I wasn't necessarily in with them totally, if at all. So I think
what about you,
Jaybe?
JB?
Feeling kind of permeated,
Yeah.
For me in my adulthood.
So when you look at the socioeconomic status of Black people within this country, you'll see the wealth disparities between them and white people. That shows that class and race are intrinsically linked together when it comes to Black people. That says it right there. Like, people can go, oh, well, it's not intrinsically linked. And if that was the case, then the wealth disparities between races would not exist.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fact that the wealth disparities do exist between races already shows that class and race are intrinsically linked. It's just some people are ignorant to the findings, or they're looking the other way and they don't want to see it. But when it comes to us, as well as the generational class divide that has happened due to us being locked out, like, for instance, things like the New Deal, the GI Bill, being locked up. There was, I forgot what year it was, but there was a point in time when Black people couldn't even have life insurance.
Yep.
So, with that being said, the accumulation of wealth was not possible for us at all. And so, unfortunately, within this country, white people have had hundreds of years of a head start, while we're just now trying to catch up. And even still, we can't catch up.
Let's preface by saying, you know, like, generally, we know that there are some white people who do struggle, you know.
Of course,
so
yeah.
Because I'm sure there's going to be some people in the chat who are going to be like, well, I'm white and I'm poor, so, like, you know, yeah.
Oh,
but
of
I
course.
think as a race,
Mm-hmm.
you know, like, there are certain privileges that are afforded to you if you're white and poor, I would argue, than if you're Black and rich.
Yeah. But
So,
I just want it to be known that the white people who are poor are not poor because they're white. That's the issue.
Yeah.
Some of us Black people are poor because we're Black, and some of us are Black because we're poor. Well, not some of us are Black because we're poor. But what the hell was that? But it's like, it's synonymous with each other when it comes to this country. Even if you go to the billionaires, there's 6 Black billionaires in this country, if you want to look at it from that direction. That's it. That's it.
Yep.
All the rest of the billionaires are white or non-white, mostly just white. So when you look at it from that perspective, when you look at the racism that we experienced from slavery, when you look at the racism that we experienced from Jim Crow, when you look at the fact that our prisons, 40% of the prison population is Black, even though we only make up 13% of the population.
Yep.
So it goes to show that really the racial disparity, as well as the economic disparity, go hand in hand. And so for someone to downplay that or say, you guys can't talk about race, you guys need to talk about class, I can't. I can't.
It's
like
both.
It's like, yeah, it's both. It's like intrinsically linked. It's like me and my gender. It's intrinsically linked. I'm a dude and I'm Black. You know, it's intrinsically linked. I can't go outside of that.
So, Danny's earliest encounters with racism were marked by the pernicious Yellow Peril ideology, which flourished under the U.S.'s new Cold War regime against China. Many of these encounters happened outside of the home, as my Vietnamese mother and white father navigated their own racial contradictions. They also happened outside of the formal education system, since U.S. schools are notorious for whitewashing history and valorizing slave owners in their capitalist project. My race consciousness, so to speak, was planted by peers. Race was an unavoidable fact of life. Asian slurs were frequently employed by peers on the playground and in the streets. Many would cackle at me with stretched eyes to demonstrate that they looked more Asian, quote unquote. I was frequently reminded of racist stereotypes about the lack of sexual prowess possessed by Asians. Some took my perceived Chinese or Asian identity as an excuse to steal my belongings or enact some other kind of violence. Many years would pass before I understood these experiences as an outgrowth of U.S. imperialist policy. Anti-Asian racism manufactured consent for immigration laws banning Chinese laborers beginning the mid to late 19th century, and the U.S.'s wars against China, the Philippines, Korea, and Vietnam later in the 20th century. Mistreatment from peers, while infuriating, was not the primary force that awakened me to interconnection between race and class. Witnessing struggle and oppression was the main catalyst. Once I entered adulthood, I realized that we are all children being force-fed reactionary and divisive ideology. Racism was not just about my suffering, but the suffering of masses of people. Such revolutionary empathy is rooted in a number of experiences that reflect the inner workings of a capitalist system reliant on dehumanization to reproduce relations of exploitation. So he remembers in 7th grade social studies teacher who reinforced my school's racist school tracking system by asking me to transfer classes so I would stop hanging with the knuckleheads, a euphemism for poor black youth. I remembered being stopped and frisked in my first year of high school by a city cop and watched my black peers swiftly rush ahead of the scene to avoid the same, if not worse, treatment. I remember the white woman who ran clutching her purse when she spotted my Haitian friend speaking to me at the gate of my building. By the time I turned 21, I attended the funerals of 3 black youth very dear to my heart who died prematurely of suicide, preventable illness, and homicide. One doesn't easily forget the screams of pain coming from their loved ones. I came to understand racism as a mechanism of class warfare in my college years. There was nothing like being surrounded by rich white elites for the first time in my life to cultivate rage at the system. During my sophomore year, an Afro-Dominican student and friend at the college was arrested and charged with a hate crime for getting into a fight with a white person in town and allegedly calling him the N-word. The school immediately suspended him, and his entire future at the university was placed at risk. This seemingly absurd yet unjust turn of events spurred me into activism. He quickly wrote an op-ed in the school newspaper, Danny Did, which caused such a stir among residents and students alike that anonymous death threats came in my direction. I made contact with like-minded students, and we began organizing around issues of race on campus. Our efforts helped create an environment where the charges against the students were dropped, and he was allowed back on campus to finish his education. But we didn't stop here. We continued our activism to tackle other issues such as the lack of ethnic studies or black studies programs on campus, burnout, mounted as liberal identity reductionism, and dialogue were favored by administrators and student activists over significant changes in policy, placing insurmountable barriers in front of change. His frustrations, yes.
Can we just add, we talked about this last week with the Dutch apology regarding their role in the slave trade. The idea we'll talk about it more. You know, the issue that Black activists had was we've done talked about it, you know, and there are issues, and we also have issues that we've addressed that you haven't mentioned. You know, we also have a list of demands by CARICOM that you have not addressed. The idea that you want to kind of, again, circumvent that with we need to build more museums, and not even in the countries that is affected, that more museums and better the education, you know, it's not helpful. So just another ploy, capitalist society, again, we'll talk around the issue, but we won't get to the heart because it's, you know, because ultimately it affects their money. That's the thing. It affects their money and it affects their well-being.
I found it interesting. Both of you kind of have done academic stuff, and in those circles, Haifeng's relation with that was, you know, enlightening to say the least. Any thoughts, Jaybe, on those few paragraphs?
Yeah, you know, it's heartbreaking to see Danny's experience because you don't want to see that happen to anyone. And this is the reason for wanting to fight for liberation so that you won't see people suffer like this anymore. the liberation is a struggle born out of wanting to stop your suffering and to prevent further suffering from others, which is just, it's rooted in empathy.
Yep.
So I definitely see where he's coming from. This kind of this reminds me of when I was working as a young man in a restaurant, and as I was walking home in the more affluent area of town to my bus, I had to walk about a mile to the bus stop because the bus stop that I could go to, it stopped running. So I had to go all the way a mile. And so as I was walking, a car passed me by full of young white men yelling the N-word at me. And I walked, and then not even a minute and a half, 2 minutes later, a car full of young white women screaming the N-word at me afterwards. And I also have memories of being racially profiled by a police officer because I was looking at him a little too long. So a lot of us have these stories, and we don't want to have these stories anymore. And even though I didn't want somebody like Danny to have these stories to tell, because I don't want them to have these experiences, I'm glad that he's using it to spur himself and others to action so that we can have something better. And I like the fact that he's linking it with economics as well.
Yeah, that they're both part of the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he continues with like my frustration, and I'll just finish this up real quick and we'll wrap. But my frustrations ended up being a blessing in disguise. They led me to a semester-long trip to New York City and a foray as an intern in the labor movement. Occupy Wall Street had just begun, and activists were having intense conversations about race and class. These conversations were often fraught with tension. People spun in circles, arguing about whether race or class were more important to movement politics. The arguments felt worse than fruitless. They felt out of touch with reality. I knew racism and class warfare were interconnected, but I didn't have the language to explain why or how. I began to develop such a language after several friends introduced me to the science of Marxism at the end of my New York semester. Huey P. Newton, Claudia Jones, Fidel Castro, Vladimir Lenin, and a host of revolutionary socialist leaders of the 20th century taught me that U.S. imperialism requires racism to reproduce class relations of exploitation. Capitalists accumulate profit from the exploitation of workers in their system of race-based benefits, places a critical in front of the solidarity necessary to wrestle off the shackles of such a class arrangement. This is no abstraction. Black workers in the U.S. are paid as low as half the wages of white workers for the same employment and are twice as likely to be unemployed. Incarceration and police brutality are experienced at far higher rates by black workers than white workers. Life expectancy is falling for all U.S.-based workers, but is falling fastest in Black American and indigenous communities. Any class struggle that fails to give these disparities their proper attention is bound to fail. Furthermore, racism is a key pillar of the American empire. All U.S. wars, whether on indigenous peoples in North America or the people of Iraq, have been sanitized by a psychological campaign of dehumanization. American exceptionalism itself is a racist ideology. The U.S. is said to spread democracy and freedom around the world, despite the innumerable war crimes it has committed in the last decade alone. The nations of Libya, Syria, Ukraine, Venezuela, Russia, China, Cuba, Somalia, Ethiopia, Eritrea, the DPRK, and many more have been subject to some act of U.S. warfare. Racist propaganda against each one of these nations has rendered U.S. war crimes that much more effective by creating an endless list of enemies from which to fear. Propaganda is one of the biggest fronts to the America's empire's endless war regime. Those who are genuinely interested in winning the class war at hand must seek truth from facts. The fact is that racism is a very real phenomenon that shapes every facet of U.S. imperialism. Solidarity with and among The oppressed is only possible if the scourge of racism is defeated materially and ideologically. This doesn't mean we conduct a witch hunt for individual racists, but rather that our efforts to win political power possess a built-in and organized intention to develop new human beings. It also means that we deeply study the ways in which racism divides humanity for capitalist profit and domination as we search for the correct methods to wage class struggle and restore the needs of humanity. That was it. Everything Danny had to say on it. Closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, we need to have better discussions. And I've heard this among Black people, like, oh, we just need to worry about race. You know, like, it's like, no, we have to worry about class as well.
I didn't even think about it from that direction either.
They are, you know, and all of it is tied. Like, it's funny, like, just the main theme just tonight. I don't think I don't think we necessarily intended it, but it's just capitalism. You know, it's just the core, it's the root of all of this. You know, like, but I think we have to look at it from both ends, because I think, especially for Black people, even though we may not necessarily kind of connect it to class, because we're the lowest of the low generally anyway in society, that it like, we don't necessarily think about that. Like, but yeah, it's both. It's not an and or. For I think especially for us, it's both. And we have to treat it as such.
Yeah.
Any disagreement?
No. In fact, I'll take Collin's point even further. It is necessary within a capitalist system for us to be at the bottom.
Right.
It requires us to be at the bottom. You see, capitalism, in order for it to be able to maintain itself, you have to have separated groups that are separated by a particular type of ideology or mentality in order for us to stay divided, so that we don't team up together to go up against the capitalist or the oppressor class. So race, which is a colonial construct, has to be divided. And then we have to divide it male, female. Then we have to divide it from hetero to LGB. Then from cis to trans or non-binary. Then we have to do it from native born to immigrant. So there's all these dividers that we have to have in order to keep people, the working class, from actually homogenizing, so that we can overthrow the capitalist class by means of a revolution. Right. And so, but there has to be a recognition that for us, race and class are intrinsically linked. And this is one of the tools that they use in order to keep us not only separate by race, but separate by class as well, to make it seem like we're lower. And remember, I forgot which special it was, but Chris Rock did a special. I don't know if it was Bigger and Blacker or Never Scared. I forgot which one. But he said, I am a rich Black man, and not even a poor white man will want to trade places with me.
Trade places with me. Yeah.
And that is telling, right? It's saying, wait, we can never actually get to where we need to, because not even the poor white person would want to be in our spot, because they know what we go through. And so we have two things working against us, versus a poor white person has one thing working against them. And so it places upon the poor white person, in their mind, yeah, maybe poor, but at least I'm not Black.
Right.
And so It's like, and here's the sad part. If you ask a lot of Black people, if you ask them if they could switch their race, sometimes some Black people will actually say, yeah.
JB, do you know, I'm trying to remember what, you follow the comic books. You've read a few of those.
You know? Red, you give me a little more credits.
X-Men was the classic analogy here, right? And how many of them chose to take away their abilities?
Yeah.
You know, this is the same thing. Literal superpowers we're wanting to throw away, you know? But, no, yeah. I mean, interesting discussion for sure. I think it's definitely important to link those two because they are important. That whole global North versus global South thing, also part of that. You know, it's part of the problems with the space on the left now is class struggle among content creators. Like, you know, that's part of it.
I mean,
you know, like it's
you know, you've witnessed it and you've seen it with me just even in this year. You know, like even among like commentators and content creators. Like
those PMCs be working hard though, don't they? They be working hard. Right. But anyway, speaking of working hard, JB, you got places for the people to find you? You got stuff coming up?
Yeah, so if you guys want to check me out on my channel, you can go to Jaybe Font. Just type in Jaybe Font like you see here. You can go there and find me on my channel. You can also find me on Revolutionary Blackout Network. I do the JB show on Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern. Then I do RBN Live on Tuesdays at 4. And the Zabby and JB show on Thursdays at 6. If you want to find me on Twitter, you can go at JB Font. Or if you want to go to my show Twitter, you can go at JB Font Show. You can find me on there as well. And once in a while, you can catch me here with Reef and Collin, chopping it up.
Stay tuned for more shows. You can find our Twitter profile at Get Indie News. Keep up with who's doing what and when.
Leave a like. Leave a like for them too.
Hit that sub.
Subscribe.
We're almost at 1K. Literally 70 people. Come on. You'll know 70 people. We're almost there. Then we can start stealing the rich man's money, giving it to the poor. You know how it is. Mainly Roger Meadows. He's the only one giving money out. Y'all need to step up your game. He's got the Employee of the Month club right now. He's kicking everyone's ass out here. But anyway,
kicking ass and taking names.
Appreciate you coming on. You can find me and Collin and our handles right underneath us, or find all the members to all the people of INN right there in that little indienews.network URL. It's in the description below. We should have all your stuff in the description as well, JB. But anything you want to tell people before we head out? I think that's mainly everything.
Smoke them if you got them, and mwah, forehead kisses.
Yes, sir. That's us out. As always, labels are bad. Stay independent. Good night, fam.
Good night.
We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.